Welcome to Village Church Online. My name is Jeremy and I am pastor here at Village Church. I am so glad that you've chosen to join us. If you are new, maybe even just relatively new to joining us in this way, we want to know who you are. We would love to connect with you further. So why don't you reach out, get in touch with us, and we will get back in touch with you and figure out ways that we can connect you into the life of our church even deeper. One of the things that we're doing as a church right now is called Bible Daily. And so this is a challenge for us as a church for the entire month of May, where we're going to read through the whole book of Mark from the New Testament of the Bible together every single day. It's a great challenge because as Christians, as the church, we need to be in the Bible because this is the basis of our entire faith. So you can go to thisisvillagechurch.com and there's a link you can click that'll take you to a page where we have all sorts of extra resources, reading plans for your family. You can even sign up for text alerts where it will give you a text every morning to remind you to do the reading. This is a great challenge, so go and check it out. Also, if you'd like to support the ministry of Village Church, of course you can do that, and we're very, very appreciative and grateful for all of your gifts and support. If you want to do that financially, you can do that at thisisvillagechurch.com/give. And now finally, we are continuing in our series in the book of Amos, and today Pastor Michael is going to lead us through a section of chapter 2 of the book of Amos, a really, really interesting section which is going to deal with some of the questions of how God's judgment looks to us as human beings as maybe violent, and that can be uncomfortable for us. But Michael does a great job of explaining how we can understand this because all of it points back to God's love for wanting to restore things back to a just and right kind of a world that reflects him and his character. So why don't you join me as we listen to Pastor Michael work through Amos chapter 2 together.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael. I'm one of the pastors here for you who do not know me as we are headed into week 3 on our series in Amos or Amos or whatever you want to say, doesn't matter. As we go through this series, we are talking about a lot of things that are really quite interesting, quite impactful for our souls as we're just trying to imagine this situation and the scenario of what God is trying to do. And as I was approaching Amos chapter 2, verses 6 to 16, I felt like I had to do pre-work. By that I mean I'm breaking one of my rules. One of my favorite rules is get to the text as fast as possible. This is not the week that could happen, okay? This is a long intro. And the reason why this is a long intro is because I need you to kind of grasp something very, very important about injustice. Imagine this scenario. Amos walks from the south towards the north as a rich man, somebody who nobody expects to be used as a prophet. He's betrayed by his accent and says things to these people that they don't love to hear. Compare and contrast that to Jesus, a man from the north, a poor man walking to the south, a man nobody expected to prophesy in a very captivating way and tell them things that they didn't want to hear. You get this kind of a picture. And as Chris explained last week, there was 7 different judgments on all these surrounding nations and surrounding kind of capitals and places. And it's like all of those places are surrounding Israel in such a way that it feels like God, through his words, is painting a bullseye on who he really wants to get to. And who he really wants to get to is the text here today. And what we're going to hear is we're going to hear harsh language from God towards these people. We're going to hear language that is going to be abrupt. It's going to kind of shake us a little bit. But I think what we need to do as we walk into this passage is we have to see the courtroom situation properly. What we want to be tempted to do is we want to go to this passage and we want to say, I'm the judge and God is on trial for what he is saying to these people. And it's a completely wrong way to read this text. What we have to do is we have to suspend that judgment for a second and realize that God is the one who is the judge and we are the ones who are on trial. You get what I'm saying? It's not going to be that easy. It's not going to be tough. I'm going to need you to use your brains in a capacity to understand things because ultimately, if we understand what's going on here in this passage, it's a game changer for all of us. So what's Israel guilty of? Well, they're guilty of spreading evil, the mistreatment of the poor and making slaves, the corruption and division of their worship, destructive narcissism based on their prosperity, the opposition to God-given ministry towards the prophets, and sexual exploitation. I don't know about you, but in my mind at times when I see atrocities happening all over the news, people doing just heinous things towards other people, maybe the question that comes into my mind and maybe yours is, how does someone even do that to another person? Have you ever thought that before? How does someone even do that to it? How could you ever even get yourself to the place where you would act like that towards another human being? I'm about to try and explain how that happens. And it's all about this word justice, okay? We're gonna take a couple different views. There's a guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Rowan Williams, and Miroslav Volf. All three of their minds are gonna come together to help us understand what justice is. And here it is. If you're a note taker, you're gonna love me today, okay? Proper justice is a clarity of vision. Proper justice is a clarity of vision. And this is what I mean. We have to have a clear view of who God is in order to have a clear view on justice. God looks at us attentively. He has a loving gaze that he views us in truth and in reality. And in that moment when he sees us truly, it reflects something back onto himself. This is what I mean. Because he can see us in reality, he sees us as created, which then reflects back onto himself as the one who is the creator. Okay, you tracking with me? Because he sees us properly, it reflects in seeing himself properly. Justice is a clarity of vision. And so our number one goal is to have the doctrine of God and how we view God set properly, because that view determines our clarity of vision with everything else that we pay attention to. This is my little illustration to help you out. This is us, this is God, and this is others. God initiates by showing us who he is. We reciprocate back by understanding who God is and showing him in his reality, which then reflects the way that we view other people. See what I'm saying? Let's use a different way of kind of explaining this. Okay, so here's us, here's God, here's others. God shows us who he is. We miss our view on who God is. We miss our view on everybody else. We're tracking? Justice is a clarity of vision. So how do we begin to do this with other people? Well, our identities are based up of two different kinds of things: boundaries and bridges. The Father is the Father because he is distinct from the Son. They are separate persons of the same essence. Boundary. But there is a bridge in identity towards the Son because the Father is to the Son one together in the same family. The Father can only be the Father because the Son is the Son. They are distinct yet united in their identities. And so when we are trying to think of ourselves, I am a husband, which makes me distinct from my wife, but the only way that I can be a husband is if I am connected to my wife. I am a son because I am distinct from my mother, but I can only be a son because I am connected to my mother. We're tracking? I know this is painful, guys. I wrote this knowing this was going to be painful. I need you to trust me. This is going to be important for us. The thing about our vision is that if you are a Christian, your view of other people is determined by what Jesus did on the cross. Our vision of God determines our vision on other people, and there's only with clarity of vision, now we have a clarity of justice. This is what Rowan Williams wrote about Augustine. Augustine believed that justice in society was unthinkable without doing justice to God, returning God's attentive, loving gaze in silence and praise. A society that doesn't understand contemplation won't understand justice because it will have forgotten how to look selflessly at what is other. This is what I'm trying to say. If your vision is divided, where you are looking at two separate things to give you identity in your soul, God and fill in the blank for yourself, what you have done is you've made your vision ambiguous to the point where you've hollowed out the justice in your own soul that you no longer see everything around you properly. And as soon as you have done that, you have initiated the means for injustice to grow into your heart, because now you have the possibility of seeing other people in a way that is self-serving and dominating. Why? Because you haven't seen God properly, which means you haven't seen others properly. We're tracking. Justice is a clarity of vision. It's boundaries and it's bridges. It's the thing that makes me distinct, but the thing that makes me connected. Which means if I have an improper view of God, I have an improper view of others, and the way that I begin to treat others because of the hollowing out in my divided attention means I can be something to them which is not true. This is what I mean. If I don't see God properly, I don't see others properly, which means I can see other people as less, and that will reflect back on me to possibly see myself as more. Because I don't see God properly, I might not see other people properly, and because I see these people as weak, maybe that reflects back onto myself to see myself as powerful. You see what's happening? The reflection is off. And the way that I'm viewing other people is not in a way that makes glory of who God is and how God even sees those individuals. What I'm doing is I have a distorted vision that's not clear, that sees other people one way so I could see myself another way. Maybe the reason why we cheat on our spouses is not because of anything they have done, but because of what we have done in our mind to not see God properly and have shifted our thinking towards them to see them as less, and so I've justified my actions towards them because they don't deserve my love. Maybe the reason why I belittle people at work is because my view of God is off in such a way where I see that person as less, and now I'm justified in using the words that I use towards that person because I see them a very different way. Maybe I have prejudices racially towards other people because my view of God is off, and so my view of others is off, and because they have a different origin or a different color of skin, now I look down on those people and see myself as more powerful because I lack a clarity of vision. Do you hear what I'm saying? We have to understand this, that I am who I am because of boundaries and bridges, and the great act of me allowing others to be seen properly is the distinction between these two words. Injustice begins and is actualized when I destroy bridges. And the best way to see that I have destroyed a bridge with a different group of people is between two words: my and they. If I say my to someone, it means that they have some kind of a claim on me. They might be my friend. They might be my family. They might be my neighbor. You see how the language also has some kind of a claim, like they own a piece of who I am. There's some kind of an ownership there. It's because I've made myself who I am, distinct from those individuals, but connected. The moment injustice occurs is when I destroy my bridge of connectivity to that person, and it comes away with them. Those people, that group. You see how there's no ownership towards myself there? And as soon as I've made that jump mentally, now anything towards those people is possible. My actions against them, my thoughts towards them, my words towards those people. As soon as I have destroyed the bridge of connectivity to individuals, the violence and injustice that is possible will erupt. Why? Because you've been practicing it in your mind, and all you're waiting for is the opportunity. Isn't this exactly what Jesus was talking about, as Chris mentioned last week when he said, man, if you've already lusted, you've already committed adultery. If you've hated someone, you've already murdered. Why does he say that? It's because if you lust after someone, in your mind, you've been practicing this mental action over and over and over again. You've been practicing this mental exercise, and realistically, the only thing that is lacking for you to actually commit the action is the opportunity. You have an improper view of them. You see them as less to see myself as more. This is what Dietrich Bonhoeffer writes. Discipleship does not afford us a point of vantage from which to attack others. We come to them with an unconditional offer of fellowship, with the single-mindedness of the love of Jesus. When we judge people, we confront them in a spirit of detachment, observing and reflecting as if it were from the outside. We've pushed them outside of ourselves. It is no longer my friend, my family, my neighbor. We have disconnected those people from ourselves, and we have detached and we have excluded them. That is the very first action of injustice. And so you might say, well, what kind of a claim does other people in the room have on me? What about you towards myself? There's nothing connecting us together. That's why the language that Jesus uses of my neighbor is so important. The reason why it's so important is because my neighbor, as Bonhoeffer writes, neighborliness is not a quality in other people. It is simply their claim on ourselves. Everyone that you have ever met, everyone who surrounds this world has a claim on you, according to the scriptures, with this word, neighbor. You are always a boundary, and you are always a bridge. And the moment of injustice happens through this language of exclusion. Listen to me, this is so philosophical, but I hope you understand. Injustice and exclusion is a crime against others within the walls of myself. Exclusion and injustice is a crime against others within the walls of myself. They have become other because I've removed their claim on me, and now the way that I treat them lacks a clarity of vision. We're tracking? This is so important. That's why I'm going slowly. I'm looking at some of you. I'm like, please understand this. And the reason why is because this isn't vengeance. Justice is not vengeance. It's not just getting back at someone for what they have done. I was one of the youth pastors here for a long time at Village, and I used to run junior youth camp, so like 12 to 15, 11 to 14, that kind of age group. And we had very strict rules with these students about pranks when we were at camp. And the girls, for some reason, they always went overboard. It's not a shame on the ladies, but you go overboard. And they just obliterated this one cabin of boys. At the very beginning, I had said to them, when you do a prank on someone, pranks are allowed. You can't touch their stuff. You can't harm anyone. And you can't do anything that is going to risk other people's things. Okay? Girls did not listen to that instruction whatsoever. They got reprimanded. Justice, right? So one day during chapel, a group of boys go to the bathroom, right? They're gone for quite a while. After chapel is over, I hear screaming. I go, oh no. And I walk over to the girls' cabin, and the boys who had gone to the bathroom had stolen the girls' door. They took it off the hinges, and they just stole the door. I've never been more proud as a youth pastor. They didn't harm their stuff. They didn't touch their things. They didn't harm them. I was like, this is what this is about. You know what I mean? And maybe some of us see justice as the way that those junior youth did, where it's somebody does something to me, and I need to retaliate in vengeance. When we approach this text in Amos, listen, we're like halfway through. We haven't even touched the Bible. This is what I mean. As we think about this, the idea of rendering justice in the Bible has less to do with punishment and vengeance and more with the idea of restoring equilibrium and balance. Proper justice is a clarity of vision. Welcome to the intro. Here we go. We're finally ready to hit the passage in Amos chapter 2, verse 6. Here we go. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4 I will not revoke the punishment, because, why? They sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. Right off the bat, the reason why these people are unjust is because of lack of clarity of vision. The people of Israel see other people as commodities or as things to be consumed. And the irony of this group of people is that Israel were known as the slaves in Egypt. And now what has happened? They have become the slave owners. You see how vision changes? You see that because of these Israelites worshiping Baal, their vision has become divided, and so their view on other people has now become what? Unjust. You hear what I'm saying? This is just going to go the whole way through. This is going to be easy peasy from now on. Those who trample the head of the poor, once again, an injustice towards a certain group of people because of a lack of clarity of vision towards God, into the dust of the earth and turn aside the way of the afflicted. A man and his father go into the same girl so that my holy name is profaned. This is not light. Sexual exploitation of others is the result of a lack of clarity of vision on who God is. You see what I'm saying? That the Israelites were supposed to be a kind and hospitable people. They were supposed to be the kinds of people who showed everybody else what it meant to be a human being, and yet they seem to be caught off guard. They seem to be the kinds of people who used sexuality as expressing some kind of a humiliation or a violence or a domination of others, and we begin to realize the vision is off, and so the injustices begin to occur. Verse 8, they lay themselves down besides every altar. This is like a worship connotation. So now it's not even injustice towards a lack of vision on God leads to a lack of proper action towards others. A lack of vision towards God leads us astray to try to follow other gods. And every garment taken in pledge, and in the house of their God, they drink the wine of those who have been fined. Not only is their view of people off, their view of God is off, their view of worship is off, and what begins to happen within the soul of these individuals is they see themselves as greater than what they truly are. Verse 9. Yet it was I who destroyed the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and who was strong as the oaks. I destroyed his fruits above and his roots beneath. When we get to this passage, what we begin to see is this idea of Baal. The god that Israel was also worshiping was the god of fertility and the god of seasons. And what God, Yahweh, is trying to do in this mention is, what does he do? Everything that Baal could do, guess who dominated? You know that pithy little God that you follow, you think is so powerful? You know that God that you are just devoting yourself to and forsaking me because you don't have a clear vision of who I am? If you think he's powerful, look what I just did to him. You see the frustration? It's like he's looking at them and saying, you have no idea who I am. And if you think he is a competitor, watch and see what I do. And we see these ideas: sexual exploitation, a lack of understanding when it comes to worship, following and worshiping other gods. And what we begin to see is a pattern that you and I follow within our own lives all the time. We run to other things to validate our existence. For some of us, it's comfort. We love to worship comfort. And so everybody else is just an obstacle in your way towards that goal. Some of us worship coveting, which means, of course, we're not happy with where God has us because we doubt that he even knows what we want and is going to give us that thing anyways. Some of us worship gluttony. No wonder we could never have enough. No wonder we always feel not satisfied with our place here in the world. And what we begin to do is, because we have so many idols, we have so many gods that you and I are trying to worship, it's like we're trying to satisfy them in every moment. We run to covet and we say, are you satisfied, covet? And they go, yes. And I run to comfort and I go, are you satisfied, comfort? And they say, yes. And And I run to gluttony and I go, gluttony, are you satisfied? They say yes. And they get to sit around, and you and I are running around trying to satisfy other gods. No wonder you're exhausted. And you know the kind of exhaustion. It's not an exhaustion that's going to get better with extra hours of sleep. It's a soul level exhaustion that says, I have a lack of vision and my life is off. Sexual exploitation, wrong views of God, wrong views of worship are all coming from satisfying things that ultimately do not have a hold in your life. And once this begins to happen, you begin to change. Verse 10. Also, it was I who brought you out of the land of, here we go, and led you 40 years in the wilderness to possess the lands of the Amorites. Remember how I told you that in Egypt, Israel was the slaves, and now they've become the slave owners? God didn't forget this. Who brought you out of that place? I did. And who were you in Egypt? We were the slaves. And now what have you become? Remember Egypt, that place that you went to that was wealthy and powerful, was expanding their borders, had military might. Remember that group of people? And in this situation, what's Israel? Wealthy, prosperous, never been better, expanding their horizons, military victories over and over. And what begins to happen is God looks at Israel and says, who do you look more like? The slave has become the slave owner. And isn't it interesting, listen to me, that Israel was under God's judgment when they were wealthy, healthy, and prosperous. We think God's judgment's happening when everything sucks. Life's going down the toilet. I feel like nobody cares for me. No. When everything was going great is when God looks at them and says, you have forgotten me. Finney did a great job of explaining that Israel had put golden calves all over the northern kingdom of Israel. Golden calves. There is nothing more ironic than them putting up golden calves. Why? Because what happened, Egypt? When they left, Moses goes to meet with God, and they go up, and Moses comes back, and he sees that all of the people have built a golden calf that they were worshiping. And when Moses calls it on them, Aaron just goes, dude, I don't know what happened. A bunch of gold fell in a furnace, and a calf came out. It was crazy. And Moses is like, are you serious? We just got led out of this oppressive regime. Creation moved out of the way for us. And you're still trying to pay attention to other gods? Now, the question I always thought about myself with this golden calf thing was, where did they get the gold? Did you know that when the Israelites were leaving Egypt, God said to the Israelites, plunder the Egyptians. Plunder the Egyptians, take their gold. And what do they do with that blessing? They use it for self-serving means and find themselves in judgment. This is what I want to tell you very clearly here today. Present blessings, selfishly consumed, will lead to future downfall. Present blessings, selfishly consumed, will lead to future downfall. I was talking to a pastor friend of mine, and I was kind of workshopping the language of this with her, and she said it, I think, even a better way. When blessings lead to idols, it will always lead to slavery. Because their vision was off of who God was. What begins to happen is we see ourselves differently, and we see the way that we act within the world differently. Verse 11. Here we see that it's not sexual exploitation, not mismanaged worship, not other gods. I raised up, this is God speaking, raised up some of you, of your sons for prophets, and some of your young men for Nazirites. Is it not indeed so, O people of Israel, declares the Lord? What he's trying to get at is the idea here that God has created people to do his work within certain contexts. I've given you prophets, and I've given you Nazirites. And how does Israel respond to God giving them these kinds of individuals? But the Nazirites had a vow that they weren't supposed to drink alcohol. But you made the Nazirites drink wine and commanded the prophets, saying, "You shall not prophesy. Behold, I will press you down in your place as a cart full of sheaves press it down." What God is rebuking them for is not allowing him to speak to him. Isn't it funny, by Israel cutting off these individuals, the Nazirites and the prophets, they are actually stopping God's voice being heard by them. By stopping God's workers, they are stopping God's work. They are getting rebuked for a lack of clarity on how God wants to operate within the world. For us, the takeaway is this. Right now, how do our actions cut off God from our lives? For us, the question might be, how do we cut off right now the ability of God's voice to get to us through the mouth of others? What you and I need to be very careful of, and what we need to hear as the rebuke from this text as well, is that you and I cannot undermine God's usage in this world because of our preference. Because a lack of clarity leads to a lack of knowledge of what to do next. We need to keep going. I am so far behind. This is the judgment. Their flight shall perish from the swift, and the strong shall not retain his strength, nor shall the mighty save his life. Verses 15 and 16. He who handles the bow shall not stand, and he who is swift of foot shall not save himself, nor shall he who rides the horse save his life. And he who is stout of heart among the mighty shall flee away naked in that day, declares the Lord. This is God's judgment. You think your warriors can do anything? Nope. You think your warriors are going to be powerful to stop me? Nope. Watch all of the military might that you have, and if you try to put it against me, look at what happens. Why? It's the same reason why you worship Baal. You have no idea who I am. Now, one of the things that you and I might do when we read a passage like this where God is seeming quite aggressive and he talks about this kind of very violent action towards people, you and I might ask ourselves the question, why does God use this kind of violence towards people? Well, first of all, I think there's an underlying theme, which is God is the one who gives life, God is the one who takes life. It's a very non-nuanced way of expressing it. What I'm trying to say is God is so much more to the point that God can choose to do whatever God wants to do because he's God. And he's not doing this without any kind of thought. He's doing this intentionally, and the reason why he uses this violence towards the injustice of others is because God is the kind of God who brings himself into human worlds and uses human means for God's greater glory. This is how one theologian writes it. Violence, the narrative testifies, arises organically from the world that human beings make for themselves. Listen, God enters the world to recover the world, only to be drawn into the mechanisms and systems of violence that God seeks to overcome. Let me make this really simple. Imagine if God created all the Lego in the world, and we as human beings took all of that Lego and we destroyed the Lego and destroyed everything that God has built. The question would be, is God going to just remake new Lego, or is God going to use the broken pieces that you and I broke to rebuild what he first built? God says, I'm going to use the broken mechanisms that I originally created for my greater glory to rebuild and have restoration and renewal. So he comes into our situation using our broken system in such a way that he is able to provide justice towards us. The word justice in Hebrew is used many, many times, and it's usually around these four different groups of people: the widow, the orphan, the alien, the immigrant, and the poor. I said 5 things. The widow, the orphan, the alien or immigrant, 1, and the poor. He calls these the quartet of vulnerability. And whenever injustice is done, it's usually done towards one of these 4 groups. So what you and I have to understand is that the harming of this group of people is because we see a lack of clarity of vision, and so because we see them as less, we see ourselves as more, we justify our actions towards them because they are nothing to us. But here's the challenge, that when you ignore, listen, it's not just harming these people, it's when you ignore the needs of the widow, the orphan, the alien, the poor, the fact that we don't care for them. It's not just that we don't notice them, the not noticing them, the not caring for them, the not standing up for them is not seen as a lack of charity in the Bible, it's seen as a lack of justice. Some of us, immediately when I say that, get very hesitant. Some of you might have a wall that goes up and goes, that sounds really liberal, dude. You sound lib. And here's the problem. This kind of is very liberal from the Bible speaking. When you look at other places in the Bible, things like gender, family, sex, those topics sound incredibly conservative. The problem that I'm trying to bring up with you right now is you have a set of glasses that comes from a human political organization that you cannot use in the Bible because the Bible defies and breaks the boundaries of your political vision. He's doing something more. We're not this way or that way in a middle ground. No, God has a holistic vision for the way that you and I live our lives that cannot be crammed between the spectrum of liberal and conservative. We have to have a proper view of Him. I'm so over time. I need to go faster. Here we go. Here's the recap. When does God use violence? God uses violence in a couple different ways. He jumps into 4 different situations where He is the perpetrator of violence. 1, the flood. 1 righteous family. 2, Babel. No righteous people. Sodom and Gomorrah. Less than 10 righteous individuals. Egypt. No one in that story is described as righteous from Egypt's point of view. Which means that if God is in the place to use violence as a judgment, it must mean that Israel is in a way worse off place than you and I could possibly imagine. 2, listen to what's happening with these individuals. In the flood story, evil is spreading rampantly, and God ruins an already ruined creation. And like Israel, God is ruining an already ruined kingdom. Story number 2, Babel. This is a group of individuals who have succumbed to a destructive narcissism to say that we could be like God. Israel and their prosperity are following the same suit. Sodom and Gomorrah, sexual exploitation, violence used as humiliation and dominance towards others. Israel is doing the same thing. Egypt, Pharaoh manages the human differences through exertion of violence. They take slaves. Pharaoh hinders Moses and Aaron as being prophets and being used to speak God's words towards them. They worship other gods and are putting those gods as competitors towards Yahweh. And what happens with Israel? They do all the same things. They take slaves, they exert violence, they show an apprehension to God's words by limiting the prophets, and they present other gods in front of Yahweh. And how does God respond to this? Exodus chapter 12, verse 12. And on all the gods of Egypt, I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. And the way that God responded to Egypt is the same way that God responds to Israel. So, what's my point in all this? This is what Daniel Hawk writes. Yahweh does not inflict massive violence unless the threat has magnified to such an extent that destruction is the only foreseeable end. There is no instance of mass destruction in Genesis that associates divine violence with divine anger. Yahweh does not explode against the victims in a fit of rage. Rather, Yahweh steps in after careful deliberation to do what must be done for the sake of whole of creation. In other words, divine anger must be understood against the backdrop of divine sorrow. What God is challenging Israel about is he's saying to them, when I see you, you seem to look more like the oppressors of history than you do my people. And something needs to be done. My question here is, do you see how serious God is about justice? And if you have a New Testament perspective on this, let this mess you up. We see other people as less, and so we try to make ourselves more. And we justify our actions towards them because of a lack of clarity of vision. And yet there was one who was more than you and became less than you. Yet there was one who was more powerful than you and decided to be weaker than you and I. There was one who was more than every single person in this room who chose to become less. And what did he receive? The judgment of exclusion from his Father. By taking on your sin, he who knew no sin became sin. Why? So that in him you and I can become the righteousness of God. And all of our injustice was placed onto the Son of God. And he died a brutal death in such a way where he says, I will satisfy the wrath. God's justice is so important that Jesus had to die for it. Father, we thank you as we sit here through this time and as we begin to think through all of the massive implications of this text. We pray that you would illuminate our minds, that you would allow us to see our own life in the way that we see other people, that it all comes from a lack of clarity of who you are. And so our lack of righteous and beautiful action towards others is the result. Confront us, push us, engage us in a way that we actually begin to see other people in this way that is more in line with who you are. And as we begin to do that, that we become the kinds of people who see you, pursue the kind of clarity of vision of who you are, how you revealed yourself through these scriptures, and allow that to take action in the way that we treat the quartet of vulnerability, the widow, the poor, the orphan, and the alien. We thank you, we love you, and in Jesus' name we want to pray. Amen.
Can't go back to the beginning. Can't control what tomorrow will bring. But I know here in the middle is the place where you promised to be. Not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? As I walk now through the valley, let your love rise above every fear. Like the sun shaping the shadow, in my weakness your glory appears. Not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again?
6 tells us to be strong and courageous. Tells us to not be afraid and to not fear, for the Lord your God, he goes with you. The Bible tells us that he will not leave us and he will not forsake us. And because of that truth, we can confidently sing together, not for a minute was I forsaken. Come on, let's sing that together. And not for a minute was I forsaken. The Lord is in this place. The Lord is in this place. And come, Holy Spirit, dry bones awaken. The Lord is in this place. Oh, the Lord is in this place. And not for a minute was I forsaken. The Lord is in this place. The Lord is in this place. And come, Holy Spirit, dry bones awaken. The Lord is in this place. The Lord is in this place. Yes. Oh, the Lord is in this place. Yes, the Lord is in this place. Yes, He is. The Lord is in this place. So I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? Will you meet me here again? Will you meet me here again?